5 years. 5 agonizing years. It was finally done. What had begun as a side project born from joking with my colleagues after too many beers had taken over nearly every aspect of my life ever since that night. I stood in my lab, looking at my magnum opus. I felt strange as I stood there, drinking in its beauty. I felt a sort of hyper-awareness. I could smell the cleaning chemicals on the countertops and equipment. I could feel every hair on my arms standing on end from my anxiety and excitement, or maybe just the chill from the air conditioning. I could even feel the floor through the soles of my tennis shoes. Everything I'd done in the last 3 years had been leading up to this moment. As much as I didn't want it to, my mind began replaying the events of the last 3 years. The number of times I'd fainted after skipping too many meals. The nights of tossing and turning before I'd given up on sleep and returned to the lab. The hours on hours I'd spent in my library or working on the machine. Finally, it replayed the nights that the side project became the most important task in my life. The night that Emily was killed. She was an incredible woman. Beautiful, kind, incredibly smart. She was nearly 5 years younger than me, but she was my equal at nearly every level. We'd married after only a few years, and the next 3 had been nothing short of bliss. Until that night. She'd gotten a call from her doctor. In 9 months, we'd be parents. She was thrilled. I was thrilled. Her family was ecstatic. She, her mother, and her sister had planned a night out to celebrate. A movie, then dinner. It had been raining outside when she told me she was leaving. In all honesty, I don't remember what she said. I'd been too busy with my research, studying the plans for the machine. I wish now that I'd made the time. On her way back home, something happened to the car. It was too damaged to say for sure, but the investigator later reported that the car had broken down in the middle of the road. The coroner had said that she died almost instantly, as had the baby. The time machine was ready for its first test. I shook my head. If everything went right now, then the last 3 years would have been worth it. If all went well, then everything would be all right again. I typed in the sequence, followed by the date I wanted. I took a deep breath and tried to still my trembling fingers. I stood up and walked quickly to the large X I'd made on the floor with duct tape. The machine had been activated. I had programmed it to send me to the desired time. Then, after 10 minutes, the amount of time I'd need, it would bring me back. I had tested it several times on non-living specimens, a rock, a cotton ball, a wad of paper, and living, an earthworm, a rat, a bullfrog. But I would be the first human test subject. I told myself I wasn't nervous as I watched the machine powering up. It looked a lot like an old 1980s VCR, only the size of a suitcase and standing on 7 arched metal legs. Its casing was colored jet black, with a single red eye that pointed at its target. But to me, it didn't matter what it looked like. I was about to get my life back. The machine fired at me. A red pulse hit my body, producing a feeling like being hit with a sudden, powerful gust of wind. At first, nothing happened. Then I became aware of an odd sensation, as though every part of my body, minus my eyes, ears, and mind, had suddenly fallen asleep. I couldn't feel my heartbeat, hot or cold. I couldn't even sense the floor through my shoes. I whirled around. No one was there. I had no heartbeat, but my anxiety doubled. Who had spoken? How had they been here? I became aware of another noise. I turned around again, and my jaw dropped. I was still in my lab, only now it looked the way it had 3 years ago. The machine was gone. In its place was a card table with a pot of coffee and assortment of family photos. My other projects, long abandoned by my time, were again in their places, ready for further testing. But the greatest shock was directly in front of me. Sitting at my desk, reclining in my swivel chair, I saw myself as I was 3 years before. He didn't notice me. I wasn't shocked. Even now I get very absorbed in my reading. It didn't matter whether he saw me or not. I just needed to talk to Emily. At that point I realized how simple my plan had been. I had simply decided to go to Emily and convince her to reschedule her night out. I hadn't truly decided what to say. I finally decided to tell her that the roads were unsafe and had been about to leave the lab when she entered. For a moment, I was frozen. There she was, alive again, the love of my life, the reason I'd been lost for so long. Joy, sorrow, relief filled my heart, replaced immediately by more anxiety. How on earth was I going to explain why there were 2 of me in the lab? Emily, I tried to say, but no sound came out. My voice, like the rest of my body, was senseless. I couldn't speak. Then, as I stared at her, she walked right through me, as though I were a ghost, as though I weren't there.
Darling,
she spoke. I couldn't breathe, forgetting everything for a moment just to listen to her voice. The past me grunted in response. I realized he wasn't listening. I remembered that I hadn't been listening that night either.
I'm heading out now. The movie starts at 6 and Shelley wants to get a good seat.
Yes, dear. Don't go, I tried to shout. The rain is too heavy, reschedule. But I couldn't make noise. She couldn't hear me. She kept talking.
Did you take the car to the shop today?
What? Take the car to the... A memory resurfaced. The car had stalled that afternoon while Emily was coming home with groceries. She'd tasked me with taking it to a mechanic. I'd planned to, but then had started researching. I forgot to get it repaired. The past me, unaware of my horrifying revelation, simply grunted. Emily asked again.
Everything's okay with it? Great, thanks. I'll be back by 10 or so.
Don't go.
I started screaming.
Please, Emily, no. Don't go. I can't lose you. We have a whole life ahead of us. Think of the baby. Think of yourself. Please, I can't lose you again.
She left the lab. I kept shouting. I heard her car start up. I heard her drive away into the rain. And she was gone. The past me kept reading, unaware of what we'd just lost. I was numb. She was gone. Again. I remembered the words of friends and well-wishers at the funeral. They said that it wasn't my fault. I didn't need to be sorry. I hadn't done anything. They were right. I remembered seeing the mangled mess that was once her car. I did nothing. I felt mild tingling in my fingertips. The familiar feeling of the concrete floor beneath my tennis shoes began to return. I became aware of tears streaming down my face, of my heart hammering in my chest. My lab of the past seemed to shiver, as though I was looking at it through water. In front of me, I saw something materializing. No, someone very familiar. I realized who it was, what they were about to see, what they were about to feel. I leaned forward. In spite of my pain, I wanted to offer some advice. Don't talk. It won't help. I had a voice again. The second I finished my sentence, I was back in my lab. Where a coffee table and family pictures once stood was the fruit of 5 years' labor. I stared at the monster, wanting to break it to bits. Then I fell to my knees.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed that, please consider subscribing for more. I've been your host, Tom, and until next time,
stay sleepless.